Hello everyone. So we are doing chapter 2 part 2 today. I am freezing cold where I am and I am hugging my hot water bottle so tightly. But anyway, let's get on to chapter 2 part 2 of Baby It's Cold Outside, and it's also cold inside today. Yeah, there's some snow here on the mountain in Cape Town, and let me tell you, you can feel it. Okay, what happened between our two main characters in the last chapter is that they had their first meeting, and Maggie is sitting under a sheet naked in front of Daniel. Things are about to get interesting, y'all. Okay, let's go. Part 2. You don't have a cell phone? The question came out more like a reproaching statement, Daniel noticed. No, Daniel said and scowled once again. Do you practice? Maggie scowled in return. What? Daniel frowned at the change in subject. Scowling was her reply. You seem to do it very often and very well. No, was Daniel's irritated reply, but he stopped himself mid-scowl. Maggie looked at her hands in her lap and pursed, then bit her lip to squash a smile and coughed to hide a laugh. She didn't have to look at Daniel's face to know that he was scowling once again, but now that he was aware of each time he did it, it was becoming increasingly difficult to do it again. Oh yes, Maggie exclaimed, meeting his warning eyes once again. I have a cell phone in my pocket, which brings me to the question, where are my clothes? Daniel looked away from her, but she saw the blush crawling across his cheeks. Look, I could tell you, but you won't believe me or trust me until you remember. And I'd rather like to help you so you can go home and we can both get on with our lives. Maggie wanted to be angry at his rudeness, but she couldn't deny the logic in that. This was the reason she conceded. All right, she replied stiffly. But we're going to have a talk about why you don't have a cell phone for emergencies soon. There's nothing to talk about, Daniel growled. I have internet and a landline. I don't need anything else. Trying to escape talking about his personal life, which he was immensely uncomfortable with, Daniel distracted her by asking, What do you remember? She didn't miss the rapid change of topic. Fat lot of help there are right now, Maggie muttered, and saw the angry blush tickle his adorable dimpled cheeks. Truly, if he stopped scowling and started smiling, the man would be an Adonis. Maggie forced those thoughts away and quickly closed her eyes to recall how she came to be where she was. I was driving on the main road thingy. It wasn't really a road, she reasoned with herself, more like a path. And I turned up on the second road path thing to get to our cabin, but the ice had thickened and I couldn't drive any further, she realized suddenly. You didn't maybe misread the direction thingy, did you? Daniel teased, smug. Maggie threw him a look, but decided to continue and not indulge his smugness. That was why I got out of my car, because the ice was stopping the wheels. And you thought you'd do better against the storm on foot? Daniel asked incredulously. No, Maggie spoke through clenched teeth. I thought I'd be able to reach my mom's cabin faster on foot. That, and I didn't want her to be alone during the storm. A slight pang of what seemed like jealousy lit Daniel's eyes, but it was gone so quickly, Maggie thought she must have imagined it. It's her first time alone, she swallowed but continued. Since my dad died last year. I'm sorry, Daniel muttered softly, not meeting her eyes. He was afraid she might see some of the emotion he was trying desperately hard to control at that revelation. Don't be, Maggie spoke, her voice sounding deeper after swallowing past the lump in her throat. He was a bastard and a tyrant. We were all relieved when he finally died. Daniel balked as if he'd been slapped. You don't mean that, he said, but when he spotted the tortured look in her eyes, as if she really wanted to be happy that he was gone, but could not, Daniel swallowed and decided to distract her. The snow, you got out of the car and started walking? Ah, yes, she said and smiled. waving her hand in the air as if to clear the atmosphere. I got out and started walking. I was pretty sure her cabin was up the path, just a little way past yours when I... She suddenly gasped with horror. I slipped and fell. I must have injured something because I remember being cold and wet and in pain, and then... Daniel nodded with grim satisfaction. You passed out, and I pulled you inside. You were suffering from the frostbite, so... He trailed off and avoided her gaze. A blush once again settled on his cheeks. She understood. She was not just embarrassed for herself, but for him too. But she was more grateful than anything else. You saved my life, she said with no small amount of awe. Thank you, Mr. Winthrop. Daniel, he said as his blush deepened, but he still did not move or look in her direction. Thank you, Daniel, she said softly. I owe you my life. I'm sure anyone else would have done it if they'd heard someone in trouble, he said, obviously not comfortable with her praise. Honestly, I don't think so, she said, and his eyes met hers for an endless second. Would you like to get up from the floor now? Daniel asked as he broke eye contact first. This time Maggie blushed brightly. Yes, but honestly, my legs and butt are frozen. I can't move them, she said with a grimace. Daniel threw a hand over his mouth and his shoulders began to move rapidly. Maggie balked and blushed a brighter shade of red. Are you laughing at me? Yes, he replied unashamed and roared his laughter, but she saw the cautious look in his eyes, as if he were expecting her to steal this moment from him. Something deep within her responded to that look. I admit it's funny, so I'll allow it, she nodded. Truly, he looked most magnificent when he smiled. It was as if his whole body smiled with him. His eyes lit up, his face transformed, and his muscles relaxed. He reminded her of a marshmallow at that moment, and she very much liked marshmallows. Maggie bit her lip to distract her mind from the gutter it kept wanting to make its home with Daniel Winthrop. Okay, it's not that funny, she said after a short while. Will you help me, please? You want my help now, huh? Daniel asked, his smug look returning. Are you going to help me or not? Maggie asked a little irritably. She hated being made fun of, even when she allowed it for special occasions. Daniel rolled his eyes and moved forward to help her. She had no idea what he intended to do until he bent down and scooped her up into his arms. She squeaked, panicked. Put me down, you'll break your back. Daniel rolled his eyes, smiling smugly, and carefully placed her on his bed. He didn't want to acknowledge it, but he had missed the contact of her body against his instantly. Are you crazy? She shouted worriedly as she searched him, her eyes glimpsing feather-like caresses across his body for sign of injury. Daniel pursed his lips to quell a grin. You're not as heavy as you think, he said. And I'm not as nice as I look, she snapped back immediately. Daniel barked out a laugh and sighed. Ah, women. He shook his head and rolled his eyes. That had better be a compliment, Maggie growled. Daniel wanted to laugh again, but the pointed look from her gave him pause and he bit his tongue. Can I check your legs for injury? He asked with an arched eyebrow, the moment gone. Do you know what you're doing? She asked a little suspicious. He may be your savior, but he may not know first aid and may just want to touch her. Attracted to him as she was, Maggie didn't think that was a good idea, especially since she was hungry and missing caffeine. The adrenaline rush her body experienced at him just being so near was dangerous. If he actually touched her, she wondered if she'd be able to stop him. She wondered if she wanted to. Of course, was Daniel's indignant reply, which pulled her from her thoughts. I live alone, remember? I'm the only one I can rely on if there's an emergency in my home. Was it just her, or did that sound like it was laced with bitterness? Relax, tough guy, I'm just asking, she said, palms up in surrender. Then she began to gather the sheets up to her thighs. Daniel had been about to reply, but the erotic action had captured his attention and he stared at her creamy caramel thighs and legs with a dry mouth. She had pulled the white sheets up high enough that he could see both of her legs, from feet all the way up, and much of her beautiful thighs, yet not enough to look indecent. Still, it was enough to change his breathing patterns and wake up his heart. Daniel cursed himself silently for acting like the virgin he was before the beautiful siren and moved to kneel before her legs, hanging over the edge of his bed. He wanted to reach for the tempting exposed skin, but looked askance to her at first. He would do his duty as a gentleman and remember that that was what his parents had raised him to be. Her eyes met his and she gave a small nod, but he did not miss the faint blush high on her cheeks or the slightly dreamy look in her eyes. Daniel's hand slid up to her right foot and he started to massage and move it around, checking for injury. He kept his eyes on her face, trying to gauge whether there was any pain, but her eyes were closed and her lips were parted on a soft sigh. The higher his hands moved, the more her breathing increased. Daniel swallowed. He didn't think she realized how sexy she looked right then, in the white bed sheet with her copper tresses hanging over her right shoulder, and he was astonished by how much he wanted to gather her up and kiss her senseless. Daniel cleared his throat to push away the thought and decided to speak as a distraction, searching for a suitable topic. He noticed that he did not know her name or basically anything about her. "So, do you have a name?" he asked lamely as his hands reached her thigh. He lingered, massaging there a tiny bit longer than he should have. He reasoned with himself that she had said that her legs were frozen. As was her butt, his mind added, causing him to swallow again. Maggie opened heavy-lidded eyes and stared into Daniel's stormy blue gaze. "A name?" she echoed, trying to remember the question. "Yes," he said, and moved his hands over to her left foot and began to massage, causing her to stiffen with discomfort and her passion to abate. "My name is Eek!" Maggie shouted in pain as Daniel wrapped his hands around her left ankle. She clutched his shoulder in a death grip while trying to pull away. "Hold still," Daniel said firm yet gently. "The more you struggle, the more you'll get hurt." Maggie reluctantly stopped struggling and slowly stretched out her legs. Daniel once again took her foot in his hand, but only gently prod. His tenderness went straight to her heart. "Thought so," Daniel murmured after his inspection. "You have a sprain." "That's not so bad, is it?" Maggie asked, grim as she nibbled her bottom lip, an action that did not go unnoticed by Daniel. No," he said and cleared his throat. "You should be A-okay in a couple of days." Maggie sighed with defeat. "What a way to spend my holiday," she muttered with self-disgust. Daniel's eyebrows rose, but he didn't say anything. He also didn't release her, and where his hands rested on her knees, her skin began to tingle and crawl with excitement. "Oh, how could I forget? I had a cell phone somewhere in my clothing, both of which I would be very grateful to get back," she added with a nervous smile. Daniel grimaced again, an action she was beginning to associate with what became bad news for her. "What?" she growled. "Your clothes are still soaking wet, hanging in the bathroom, and I didn't think to check the pockets before washing them." Maggie blew out an irritated breath and looked up to the ceiling. "If you hate me, why don't you just kill me now instead of prolonging my torture?" she muttered, sighed heavily, and then faced Daniel with a defiant look in her eyes. He was proud of her for that look. It meant she wasn't going to allow herself to be a victim of her circumstances. "All right," she allowed. "So what can I wear? And I sincerely hope you don't have any intentions of keeping me naked in your home, or we're going to have a problem." Daniel almost smiled at that thought, but he was certain she would not be pleased, so replied instead, "I have some things of mine laid out for you to wear. I don't think any of my pants would fit you, so I just laid out some long johns." She had no clue as to what long johns were, but she bristled at the insult. Sure, on a good day she was a size 34 waist, but he didn't have to go and point that out. Maggie looked away from him with an irritated pout. Noticing her look at his blunder, Daniel blushed. "They're big and," he huffed. "What I mean to say is that you're too small and they'd fall off," Daniel finished lamely. Nice try, she said, but still looked irritated, as if she didn't believe him. Could you bring them to me, please? I'd like to be able to move around a bit. I'm still feeling a little stiff. Daniel wanted to argue his point, but decided not to waste his breath. He shrugged and moved out of the room to collect the things he'd set aside for when she woke up. On his return, she was attempting to stand up straight. Daniel immediately dropped his load and rushed to her side so she could lean into him before she fell over. Are you crazy? He asked with a scowl down at her as he pushed her back to sit on the bed. No, she replied, looking sheepish. I hate sitting around doing nothing. So I thought I'd at least try to limp. It didn't work, Maggie said by way of apology. Well, don't, Daniel said angrily. If this doesn't heal properly, you could end up with a worse injury. Maggie bit her lip. Sorry, she breathed out, uncertain why she was apologizing. It just felt like the right thing for her to do while he was taking care of her. You should be, Daniel replied and went to pick up the array of garments and items and quickly folded them, then laid them on the bed. Get dressed, he said and gestured to the clothes. You look like you could use a shower. Maggie gasped with outrage, then threw the nearest thing she could at him, which was a pillow. Of course it missed, but Daniel retreated toward the door and closed it behind himself. Only when he was in the kitchen and began to shiver from the cold did he realize the insult he had hurled at her. Daniel groaned. First he had called her fat, then he had called her dirty. Truly it was much easier to be alone, he thought as he sorted the food in his miniature pantry into rations for the next 8 days or so, for 2 just in case. He had just started when he realized that he didn't get the name of his unwanted guest, or tell her where the bathroom was, which may be causing her to try limping around the room. Cursing at himself, Daniel rushed to his lounge and grabbed his office chair that sat at the desk where his top-of-the-line computer was. It would help her move around because she insisted on it when she really should be resting, he thought, but he could understand her need to feel in control of something in a foreign environment. Once he reached the door to his room, Daniel knocked on the door because he was certain she wouldn't be pleased if he came in while she was dressing. But he was even less certain she wanted to see him right then. Go away, she panted. Daniel. He sighed, his assumption proved correct. I just thought to tell you that there's a bathroom through the other door, and to bring you something that will help you move around. Oh, came the muffled reply. He carefully pushed the door open and pushed the chair towards where she was breathing heavily on the wicker chair near to the window. It seemed as if she had tried to use the chair as a walker, but had been unsuccessful. He looked at her face, but she was staring at his arms and chest. He took the opportunity to do the same. His t-shirt dwarfed her and she wore it like a dress, but the v-neck afforded him a nice view of the top of her cleavage as she breathed heavily from exertion. He lowered his eyes and realized his mistake. He should have let her wear his pants. He cursed himself inwardly because his long johns clung to her like a second skin. They would warm her, but he would be warmer. He could see every curve of her beautiful legs up until the bottom of his t-shirt. She sighed dreamily after having caught her breath. By the way, why are you shirtless? Daniel stood up straight as he reached her and glanced down, realizing that he was indeed still shirtless. I was doing the washing when I heard you earlier, so I ran in, he said by way of explanation. Oh, she said, nodding and accepted that statement. Yes, Daniel said awkwardly, then gestured to the chair. Put your knee on it and push with your other foot on the ground. Kind of like walking. Maggie tried it out, grateful when it turned out it was almost as easy as walking, only slightly awkward because the chair was not tall enough to make up for her height entirely. Thank you, she said with adoration, and Daniel looked away, blushing lightly. You're welcome, he murmured, looking embarrassed. Maggie moved off toward the bathroom and opened the door before Daniel's voice stopped her. Hey, I never got your name. She pushed the chair into the small white-tiled bathroom and swiveled it so that she could face him and smile. It's Maggie Ellis. She was taken aback by the look of fury on Daniel's face. Is that short for something? he asked through clenched teeth with clenched fists. Yes, she answered, and proceeded to try and close the door. He stopped her with his voice again. What is it short for? Was his growl. You'll have to buy me a drink before I tell you, she said with a laugh and shut the door behind her, locking it in place to continue her ablutions in peace. He'd learned in a couple days that she didn't drink, ever. She didn't know what Daniel's beef was with her, but he could cook it and eat it for all she cared. She hadn't done anything purposefully to him, yet he was treating her as if she was the reason everything had gone wrong in his world. She didn't like it and she wouldn't accept it, but she would be patient with him because it saved her life. If not for that, she'd have set him straight immediately. But humor was always her way of communicating with a negative with someone. It seemed as if this was going to be a long, humorous couple of days, Maggie thought with a sigh as she turned on the water. Alright, that was the end of chapter 2, a little bit longer than expected. We're going to our scripture of the day very, very quickly. We're reading from the World English Bible. Isaiah 42 verse 9 says, Behold, the former things have happened, and I declare new things. I tell you about them before they come up. What I believe God is saying here is that He's preparing us for what we have to go through. One of the reasons that people feel anxious is because they feel that they lack control or that things are uncertain. And I believe that God is asking us to put our trust in Him because He has all the answers. He's saying that He will prepare us for the things that are coming so we don't have to be afraid. Alright, I hope you're enjoying your weekend. Stay warm. Don't forget to check out my book, Baby It's Cold Outside, on Wattpad to find out Daniel's dangerous secret, or watch Ali and Nikolai's romance unfold with a little bit of magic in Under the Mistletoe. Have a wonderful day. Bye.